People don't fear the truth, they fear the repetition of old pain in a new disguise. Carl Jung. They came back. But you don't know what to do. Your heart still trembles. You ask yourself, have they changed this time? You're not naive. You've been through the silence, the shutdowns, the "you're too much." You hoped, you waited, you forgave. And now, when they suddenly reappear with softer eyes, gentler words, you pause and wonder, maybe this time it's real. But in that very moment, you are more vulnerable than ever. Because the return of an avoidant partner is not the homecoming of someone healed, it's the recycling of an emotional pattern, now dressed in better language, but still aimed at the same result, you becoming their emotional supply without boundaries. They didn't come back because they learned to love you. They came back because they don't know how to survive without your soothing presence. And unless you recognize the true psychology behind this return, you will fall into the trap confusing absence with love and emotional need with emotional maturity. They don't come back because they suddenly realize how much you mean to them. It's not because, on some bright and clear day, they wake up from a daze and say to themselves, "I was wrong. I need to learn how to love her." Their return is not the result of emotional maturity. It's a red flag, a deeply predictable pattern of avoidant attachment when faced with loss, abandonment, and the inability to regulate their own internal states. Avoidants are not afraid of being alone. They're afraid of emotionally depending on someone they can't control. When in a relationship, they resist closeness, demand space, recoil from emotional needs. But ironically, they're the ones who can't emotionally self-soothe, so they always need someone else to do it for them. That someone was you. You didn't even realize it. You didn't think you were doing anything extraordinary. You just loved them in the most natural way. You were present, patient, and emotionally available. You became their safe haven, their emotional anchor, the one place where they didn't have to give much but still received acceptance. Unintentionally, you became their external emotion regulator because they never learned to do it internally. And that's dangerous. When you left or simply stopped chasing, their attachment system triggered alarm bells. There was no one left to ease their anxiety, no one to avoid, to push and pull, to withdraw from and still expect warmth. Your absence created an internal chaos they could neither understand nor manage. And as a survival mechanism, they came back. But don't be fooled. This is not awakening. It is psychological panic, dressed as longing. They miss you not because they love you, but because you were the only one who never demanded anything in return. In a world that expects accountability, maturity, and true presence, you were the exception. You didn't demand. You didn't pressure. You just loved. And that made you irreplaceable in their emotional avoidance ecosystem. So they come back, not because they're ready, not because they've had some deep realization, but because no one else tolerates them the way you did without asking for anything real. And unless you recognize this, unless you stop confusing their emotional distress with emotional growth, you'll fall back into the same draining pattern. Loving someone who cannot love you the way you need. You think you're in love, but in reality, you've been conditioned. Conditioning doesn't always come in the form of overt mistreatment. It happens in small, repeated moments. They withdraw, you panic. They come back, you feel relieved. Slowly, a part of you begins adjusting your behavior just to avoid losing them again. You become quieter, less needy, more tolerant of pain just to keep the connection intact. And that's exactly what, unconsciously, they want. They don't want someone too close. They want someone just close enough, but always available when they need comfort. When you pull away, their avoidant attachment system loses control. They no longer have the power to have you without giving anything in return. And it's this loss of emotional power, not love, that causes them to panic. They come back as an emotional reflex, not a conscious choice to love you better. And you unknowingly become the one who restores that power. You become the person who soothes them, not just through your presence, but through your willingness to tolerate their emotional distance. You learn to wait for texts. You learn not to ask too much. You adjust your own needs just to fit their avoidant limitations. That's not love. That's behavioral conditioning born from emotional trauma. And as you begin to act according to that cycle, they decide you're the right person. Oh, not because you're special, but because you can endure the ambiguity, the silence, the constant instability of the love they offer. This is your wake-up call. They didn't come back because you're irreplaceable. They came back because no one else will tolerate that emotional system except you. Avoidants don't seek love. They seek environments where they can exist without confronting themselves. That's the brutal truth. They chose you because you forgive easily. They chose you because you don't force them to change. They don't have to face their fears, learn to communicate, or take responsibility, because you've been doing that part for them. And now, you're exhausted. You're not drained because you loved the wrong person. You're drained because you've been abandoning yourself just to hold on to them. Each unanswered message, each moment you were told you were too much, each time they said, "I just need space," all of it taught you how to need less, feel less, and never ask anyone to grow for you. You're not loving them. You're desperately trying to prove that you're worthy of love even in the most limited, one-sided form. That's the tragedy of repeating relationships with avoidance. They don't need to grow, they just need you to shrink to fit them. True belonging doesn't require you to shrink yourself to fit in with others. Brené Brown. You've been living inside an emotional loop where every time they leave, you collapse, and every time they return, you open your heart as if you were never hurt. Because you've linked their presence to feeling loved, and their absence to something being wrong with you. But here's the truth. They didn't withdraw because you were too much. They withdrew because intimacy itself terrifies them. They didn't come back because they love you. They came back because they don't know how to function without someone regulating their emotions for them. And you've been loving like someone begging. But starting now, you can learn to love like someone who knows their worth. Not by going cold, or playing games, or pretending not to care, but by understanding the psychological pattern you've been trapped in and reclaiming your boundaries and your self-respect. This is the moment you need to face the truth. They're not acting from the heart. They're acting from strategy. When you begin to pull away, stop initiating, and are no longer the easily accessible emotional supply you once were, their heart doesn't say, "Love them better." Their mind flips into survival mode. How do I regain control over you? You see them return with softer eyes, gentler words, maybe even admissions of guilt. But behind that softness lies a well-rehearsed performance. They say, "I've been thinking a lot. I'll change. Just give me one more chance." They send sudden texts, call in the middle of the night, send you songs, old photos, long sentimental messages. It feels like a romantic short film. That's love bombing, a strategy to overwhelm your emotional clarity, creating confusion between what's real and what you're desperate to believe. They drop lines that sound like emotional breakthroughs. "This distance helped me realize how much you mean to me. I've tried dating. No one makes me feel like you do." And your heart softens. You want to believe them. You've waited for words like these for so long. But you forget one thing. Words mean nothing without consistent, sustainable action. But avoidance can't sustain that kind of effort. They might make promises, express emotion impulsively, but soon enough, as before, they withdraw, go quiet, and disappear into their own internal chaos. Why? Because what they want is not responsibility or growth, but to reclaim the comfort your presence gave them. They want to rebalance their emotional system using you, not build a real relationship with you. They don't love you. They love the feeling you give them. They love your unconditional forgiveness. They love how you don't force them to confront themselves. They love being loved without having to change. That's not love. That's one-sided emotional dependency, and you're the one carrying the full weight of it. You've become an emotional vending machine, a pit stop where they can recharge, feel seen, feel safe, and then leave. And every time they leave, it costs you more than the last. And them? They either don't know, or worse, they know, and they simply don't care. Because avoidant attachment systems separate emotion from responsibility. They can miss you without feeling guilty. They can return without feeling obligated to apologize. They can cry in front of you without having any intent to commit. You think you're witnessing growth, but in reality, you're just watching a new version of the same cycle, now repackaged with softer language and better timing. Somewhere deep down, they know you're the one who forgives. You're the one who waits. You're the one who still believes in change because you've done it before. They don't need to rebuild trust. They only need to reignite your feelings through a few carefully chosen phrases, some vague signs of remorse, and a blurry promise of the future. And if you're not grounded in clarity, you'll once again mistake temporary behavior for permanent change. So what's the difference between the two? Real change requires time, effort, and deep emotional discomfort. It comes with accountable behavior, a willingness to face wounds, a readiness to say, "I was wrong," not once, but repeatedly. Temporary behavior, on the other hand, appears when they're scared of losing you, when they're drowning in loneliness, when they need a safe place to hide. It comes and goes based on their emotions, not their maturity. A changed person isn't someone who says, "I'm sorry." It's someone who chooses to live differently, even when no one's watching. Psychology Today. If you're truly clear, you won't ask, "Do they really love me?" You'll ask, "Do I love myself enough not to return to someone who hurt me just because they know how to say the right words?" This is your moment to come home to yourself, not because you're bitter or closing off your heart, but because you finally understand. Every time you forgive without conditions, you teach them that hurting you has no consequences. You don't need one more chance with someone who already broke you. You need a new chance with someone who doesn't require you to suffer in order to stay. After all the comebacks, recycled promises in prettier words, and sweet moments laced with confusion, you may begin to realize this relationship isn't powered by love, it's powered by unrestricted emotional access. They reach out to you whenever they need emotional stability. And you, over time, have become a temporary sanctuary for someone who never truly stays. So the solution here isn't to close your heart or become cold, but to become an emotional supply they can't easily tap into. Not out of revenge, but to protect yourself from the cycle that's drained you for far too long. And to do that, you must start with one single but powerful shift. Hold your time and observe. When they return, don't rush to reply to midnight texts. Don't jump to open your heart just because they seem different. Instead, allow time to filter things out. In that silence, you'll be able to see more clearly. Are they asking questions or setting conditions? Someone truly committed to change will be curious about how you feel, willing to listen and understand. Someone who just wants the same cycle back will say, "I can't live without you. You have to understand me." Are they sharing or controlling? Sharing sounds like, "I've been thinking about how I used to react, and I'm working on that." Controlling sounds like, "You have no idea how much I've been hurting," placing you right back in the caretaker role instead of finally being heard. Ask for evidence of change, not as punishment, but as verification. You don't need a grand emotional speech. You need clear behavioral signs. Have they started therapy or just thought a lot? Can they name their own patterns and take responsibility without blaming you, their past, or their personality? Are they doing anything differently, consistently, proactively, without being prompted? If not, their return is just an emotional flare-up, not a sign of growth. And while you observe, keep living, keep loving. You don't have to freeze your life just because someone once walked away. Go on dates if you want to. Open up if someone makes you feel safe. Write down the things you put on hold for them and start doing them without anyone's permission. The emptiness they left behind isn't a crack, it's space for someone worthy to step into. When you stop waiting, when you live as though nothing is missing, when you love your life fully, you become someone they no longer have easy access to. Not because you've gone cold, but because now you have boundaries. Not because you're bitter, but because you know that no one gets to come and go from your heart without consequence. You can't keep playing the healer for the person who made you bleed. They need to learn how to manage their own emotions, not borrow your heart as their training ground. The real solution isn't about making them understand you, it's about you understanding them well enough to know you're no longer willing to be their fuel source. Because if you don't exit that cycle, you'll end up being the only one working to balance a relationship that was unbalanced from the start. And real love will never ask you to shrink yourself to fit inside someone else's emotional limitations. In the previous section, you learned how to observe, pause, demand proof, and keep living instead of waiting around for change from someone who keeps running from themselves. But now, it's time to rise to a new level of awareness. This is no longer about whether they're worthy of coming back, but whether you're willing to let yourself fall back into a pattern you've already woken up from. In The Untethered Soul by Michael A. Singer, there's a line that cuts through all noise. Only you can take inner freedom away from yourself, or give it to yourself. Nobody else can. And in the context of messy relationships with avoidant partners, this becomes the ultimate key to ending the cycle. Their return belongs to their psychological system, but whether you welcome them or protect your own heart, that's the only decision that truly matters. They may act out of lack, out of emotional panic, triggered by the internal storms they can't self-regulate. They may be going through loneliness, stress, or failure, and as a reflex embedded in their attachment system, they reach out to you. But their reaching out does not mean you owe them re-entry. Their suffering does not mean you must rescue them. Their missing you does not mean you have to step back into a role that drained you. You may have once believed their return was proof of your value. But the truth is, how you respond to their return is the real proof of your value. Because a healed person isn't someone who never gets hurt again. A healed person is someone who no longer chooses what once broke them, no matter how familiar it feels. And now is the moment you need to say clearly to yourself, I am no longer an emotional supply on demand. I am a person with value. I have boundaries. I have the right to protect my peace. Boundaries aren't walls built from fear. Boundaries are gates you open intentionally to those who earn the right to walk through. And you'll be able to spot the difference immediately when someone comes back. Someone returning out of need will be impulsive, emotional, desperate for you to forgive, trying to shove you back into the old pattern. Someone returning out of respect will be patient, consistent, and will never ask you to get over it. They'll ask what you need to feel safe. You don't measure your worth by who comes back. You measure your worth by whether you still accept what you once had to heal from. This is not a test of love. It's a test of self-respect. You may still love them, and that's okay. Emotions don't disappear just because logic understands. You can love someone and still say no. You can miss them and still enforce boundaries. You can forgive and still choose not to continue. Because forgiveness isn't about granting access to your heart again. Forgiveness is an act of inner maturity, while re-entry into your life is a conditional choice based on their consistent actions, not your lingering emotions. No one deserves the highest version of you unless they've learned how to love you in alignment with the values you fought so hard to reclaim. Their return is no longer a question you must answer urgently. You're no longer reacting. You're now choosing a position you may have lost in the past when you loved too hard. Now, you know one thing for sure. Them coming back is predictable. But whether you open the door, that's a decision that belongs to you. And only you. You don't need someone to come back. You need someone who never left when you became emotionally real. And if the past returns, remember, their reappearance is not the miracle. Your presence is what should be honored. You've learned to love someone deeply. Now it's time to love yourself with that same depth, if not more. They may repeat the cycle, but you're no longer the same person who once accepted it. You know what you deserve now, and you are strong enough to walk away when it's not present. If you're navigating a relationship with an avoidant partner, or you're on a healing journey to reclaim your boundaries and self-worth, subscribe to this channel. Here, you'll find deep psychological insights, real-life attachment stories, and clear guidance on how to love with awareness, self-respect, and wholeness. Because you were never meant to beg for love. You were meant to receive it without losing yourself.